here. Good morning, everyone. This is Amanda Takes War Bonnet Beauvais. We are here today on our weekly show with Oglala Lakota College's special project they've been doing through the library concerning the William Cody Buffalo Bill show, and how in history we had quite a bit of our own ancestors that were a part of that show for the many years that it ran, from going around the United States back then, from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, and then they went overseas many times and traveled to different countries. So, you know, we have, and they were actors. They were actors, and they did a lot of acting on the arena during the show. So it was a time when our ancestors were kind of getting restricted to the reservation now. They had to settle down and abide by government ways. And so a lot of our ancestors joined the show. They joined the show not only to earn money, but they joined the show to get the experience. They joined the show because they saw it as something that they could do rather than just be at home and do what they're supposed to be doing. But we have some really good guests today. We have Douglas Seefeldt. He is going to be, he's kind of helped set up this project, and I'll let Douglas introduce himself here in a bit. And then he's going to talk a bit about the project, what it's doing, the phases of the project, and summarize some of the important things that were collected with the show, including especially about the Lakota performers. And then we have Ernie Lapointe. He is also on our advisory committee, and Ernie is a descendant of Sitting Bull. He's a historian. He knows a lot of history things, and he's gonna talk a little bit about his ancestor, Sitting Bull, what his role was in the show. And I'm not sure if he's up to it, but what we know about Ernie is Ernie actually did a DNA test to show relationship to Sitting Bull. And our third guest is Donavin Sprague. Donavin talked a couple weeks ago about, I think it was last week, I'm sorry, his knowledge of the history of it. And one of the things that Donavin has done is he has published numerous books on old photos of from the different reservations. And so we have a really good lineup today, and I'm not going to waste time talking about this stuff. We're going to go right in with Douglas, and then we'll have Ernie, then Donavin. Douglas, can you introduce yourself, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, Donavin, Ernie. Nice to be here with you all. Yeah, my name is Doug Seefeldt. I am a historian by training. I study the American West. I'm really interested in places, landscapes of memory where things happened and how they're commemorated. That's the work I work on. But I'm also the digital editor of the papers of William F. Cody, so Buffalo Bill. And that's a project that's been going on since about 2012, maybe 2011. And at the codyarchive.org, you will find all kinds of photographs and film clips and poster, images, and texts, letters, newspapers, all kinds of stuff about Buffalo Bill's life, and obviously the big part of it, which was the public spectacle known as the Wild West show, Buffalo Bill's Wild West. And as Amanda mentioned, Lakota performers were a key part of that long-running, really influential public entertainment that traveled throughout the United States and Europe between 1883 and 1916. I made a map, a digital map of all the different places they played. And this doesn't count multiple times in the same place if they were there for a week or something, but 3,115 unique places on the map. They set up their tent, they rode around the arena, they chased the bison, they did all kinds of a couple different vignettes of that they acted in, and Buffalo Bill would come in and save the day or whatever with the cowboys. And then of course you've heard of Annie Oakley and other Johnny Baker, some of these trick shot artists who showed off their shooting skills with glass balls and targets and things like that. And then of course they had cowboys, they had vaqueros, the Mexican cowboys. They had what Buffalo Bill was doing was bringing the authentic West with the real people, including, as you'll hear later, one season with Sitting Bull, but others who were, whether they were cowboys or Native Americans from Pine Ridge, which is where he eventually contracted through the government to be able to hire the Native performers, and brought it all over, whether it's Peoria or Boston or London or France, Paris, France, or anywhere. They got into Eastern Europe near the end of that time period of the show, places that are now like Poland and some of the other Eastern European states. But they really spent a lot of time, years, in fact, in England or Britain, let's say. They didn't go to Ireland, but they went to Scotland and Wales, France, and Germany. And so it's not surprising that those European nations have a real keen interest in Native American performers and Native American culture and all the things you may be familiar with that the Europeans like to learn more about. But I would argue, and others have argued, that it's because they saw these Lakota performers with Buffalo Bill and other Wild West shows. There were other copycat Wild West shows that came to their country, and they put on a performance of their traditional, way of riding horses, way of hunting bison, way of whatever. And they also sometimes they were stereotyped into these dramatic scenes of attacking the settlers and having to be rescued by Buffalo Bill and the Cowboys, or reenacting Custer's Last Stand, or stuff like that. So there's certainly multiple sides and multiple experiences that we can learn from, some of which were very positive toward Lakota culture, and some of which were falling into the stereotypical stuff that was going on at the time in the US and Europe. But let me back up and just say, what's really exciting about this is that, we'd been assembling items in the Cody archive. There's over 1,000 items that we have tagged with the term Lakota performer. But many of those, say photographs, when you click on the photograph and you open it up and there's some descriptive information at the bottom that we put in there, we didn't know who that was. And so it'll just say Lakota man or something like that. And we know there's people who do know who that is. We know there's people on, family members, descendants, or historians, genealogists, from the community that could fill in that story, that could tell us who that person is and when they joined the show and what they performed. And maybe they came back and told stories to their family, or brought back souvenirs, or left things there in Europe or Boston or wherever. And so we just weren't sure how we were going to be able to make that happen. And then this new grant came up from the National Archives and the Mellon Foundation, and they called it Collaborative Digital Editions Startup Grants. And the key term there is collaborative. What they wanted to do is ask different groups community kind of community-oriented groups to tell them how they would organize a digital edition of their cultural history, their memories, and things like that. So they opened this up to anything that had to do with African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, and Native American communities or institutions. And so we were excited to collaborate with OLC, Oglala Lakota College, and in particular the Woksape Tipi Library and Archive. And because we'd worked with Tawa Dushino before on some grant projects. And so I'm at Clemson University, which is in South Carolina. I'm on the far side of the state away from the hurricane right now, or the tropical storm. But I started this when I was at the University of Nebraska. And so this is where the Cody Archive came to be born. And so my professional work has taken me to different institutions, but I'm still, I'm from Colorado. I'm a Western person, I think, and I'm really interested in this. And so we were fortunate to get one of, I think, 6 of these grants last year. And we've completed 1 year now of our planning, which, as Amanda mentioned, includes these Lakota community collaborator kind of steering group, advisory group, which includes Donavin and Ernie and Amanda and Cecilia and Stella Ironcloud. And we've been working, the archivist now, Valerie Janis and I and Tawa before, have been working with this group to try to figure out how we can tell the National Archives, these are the steps you take. This is how you engage the community. This is how you, develop trust in that their stories will be curated and used for positive things for this generation and future generations. But then also sort of the technical stuff about how do you record them, how do you edit them, where do you put them, into a digital format that can be accessed by everyone. So we're in the midst of doing that, and we've found many interesting things along the way that we're pursuing. Like even just coming up with an authoritative list of all the performers and their names and maybe where they are from on the reservation and who they're related to. And the challenges, when you have some people with similar names at the same time period, who are we talking about? There's a lot of that kind of stuff, but there is knowledge in the community among these collaborators and even beyond, obviously, that we're reaching out to you on the radio now to hope if you have stories in your family or objects in a shoebox in a closet somewhere that you could contribute those digital, have them scanned or photographed. We wouldn't take them from you, but that you could contribute those digital surrogates to this collection for the community and for future use. So we're going to have, at the end of the grant in the spring, we're going to have a community scanning event where we're going to invite anyone who wants to come with a photograph, a letter, a piece of clothing, or even just a story that an ancestor would have told about their time with either Buffalo Bill's Wild West or any of the other Wild West shows, and their experiences and how they, like Amanda said, how they left the reservation at a time when that wasn't what the U.S. government wanted to have happen, certainly. And I know Buffalo Bill, we have letters in the archive where he's fighting with the Bureau of Indian Affairs to pay the Native performers the same rate that he pays the white cowboys. And they didn't want him to pay him that much, or they didn't want him to leave. And so there were years where they threatened to not let him sign contracts with Lakota folks to travel. So it's a really interesting thing. Buffalo Bill's not a saint. He's not some kind of perfect hero. He's a man of his time, but in his time, I think he had a fairly progressive attitude and view toward Native people and their cultures, and he valued that. He had some Iron Tail and others who were really good friends for a long time. So anyway, the grant is a planning grant that's going to culminate in this public event where we hope to show that there are community stories that can be digitized and then put online for people to see and use for their own use and for their own interest going forward. You have any question or anything I can answer, or I can keep going?
You just keep going.
Okay, so just to the thing that I'm most interested in probably is that, because I teach digital history, what we call digital history. So I'm training a next generation of doctoral students who are historians to create digital scholarship, to make, tell stories, make arguments in a digital form of some kind, whether that's a virtual reality world or a bunch of a map or something, an interactive map, or different ways to tell stories than just in print on books and things. But these archives that we make, we have to acknowledge that they're not neutral. I mean, and I think that's to the great credit of the National Archives. They recognize that what they've been funding for the longest time have been these great man history projects of the presidential papers or, things of that nature. And they don't really have room or they're not open in a way to those stories that come from the people, from if you say bottom up instead of top down. And so acknowledging that archives are not neutral and saying, yeah, well, we want to make sure that our, a culture's voice is represented, which is what this brand new grant category was set up to do. So I think we're a really great fit for that. And so with our collaborators who are, people from the community who have a keen interest in the history of their people and the future access for the next generations to learn about their ancestors, I think that's, the way we start is the right way to do it. Now, we have, we're trying to create some ways to involve the community and educate them as well while we create content. And so we're getting to do some video interviews with people about objects from the archive that might be in the archive, like whether it's a photograph of performers or an object like a costume or a tool or something that they had as part of their show. And we're going to send those things out over social media, and we're just in the process of setting up a blog with a website for the project. So you have a place to share, if you have a story you want to share or reach out and have contact with the project going forward, that'll be really great. But we're trying to get the culturally specific descriptions, as I mentioned, of the items, the people, the whatever's in the archival material. We want Lakota terminology, language to be associated with the archival material, not just English. We want genealogical and family histories to be attached to these items and these people that are in these photographs, these performers. To be able to bring these stories to life. So one of the radio show here is a key part of a way we're trying to reach out to folks. I think it's a pretty exciting thing that we're trying to get off the ground here. Let's see. It's a complicated story. The performers, a lot of them, from what we know, took advantage, really wanted to go and signed up year after year. Others were one and done, or even less. There's documents of Cody paying the way for somebody to get on a boat and come back from Europe because they were homesick or they just needed to go home. there's some very famous accounts, of folks who were performers, who've written memoirs, but there's beneath that, there's so much more that has not been recorded, has not been preserved, to help flesh out the story and talk about that. We've learned about performers who died while they were overseas or traveling with the show in the United States. We've learned about performers who chose to stay in Europe and start families, and some came back with those new families, others stayed there. We had one of our colleagues, Frank Christensen at Brigham Young University, who's our editor of the Cody Papers, working in England. He was in London, and he went to a cemetery where there's a new marker for a performer who died there. And we're finding more and more of these stories as we research the what I would call the impact or the influence of the Lakota performers on European thought about Native Americans generally. And we've been trying to document that through research in newspaper archives or obviously photographic record and things like that. So hopefully as we put together those artifacts, the objects that are in the archive type of material with the stories that people have kept at home from their family stories, we can better bring to life that experience. Then either one on its own is a powerful thing, but together I think we can learn even more. And once we find them in a historical record and we add that to a family tradition, a story, we can then kind of extrapolate from there about the significance and importance of the experience that these folks had. So I think that's a good maybe way to segue into perhaps Ernie, a little bit about your ancestors' experience with the year with Buffalo Bill. I've seen a picture of the contract for that one year, but I know he was involved in other public tours and things like that because he was so famous at it in his own time, Sitting Bull.
Thank you, Doug. That was some really good information. He helped to kind of bring out what the project is about, and he's very knowledgeable about what the Cody archives. And we hope in the future we can he'll help us get some more people that have that knowledge, that because this is really important to our youth and to us to know these stories and to make these connections to what our ancestors did, because it's a part of us. And we need to be able to, and I've always advocated that, we need to be able to tell our own stories about our ancestors, our own stories about our history, because a lot of times in our education system and with our youth, we get the other side of history told. So it's really important that we do this. And I know there's people in our communities that have these stories that were told to them by their grandma, their grandpa, their parents, their great, they have stories in their family, and they have maybe some collections. And down through the years, I remember so many times people talking about their family members that were over there. And I was just thinking about, when he was talking about Sitting Bull, about Little Wound was also a part of the show. I don't know how many seasons he did. I did some research, and again, this is just from the the mainstream media that I was reading this from, and it was from old newspapers, and it was about how he went on tour and with Geronimo, and he got injured and he came home and he died right after that, little wounds. So that's a big part of our history too. But he had an omelet that he wore, and the omelet was a symbol of who was, like, I don't know how to say it, the coordinator, the chief of the people that were traveling with the show, the Lakota people. And I remember talking to this elder, and we were looking at a picture of Little Wound, and he was saying, that omelet, so and so might have that omelet yet, so just little things like that. But I'm gonna quit talking, and we're gonna go on to our next guest, Ernie. Ernie.
Yes. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on the show, and my stories isn't much because according to what stories they told to me as a child growing up about my grandfather's time with these traveling shows, is you have the negative and the positive, and I think the first time after he came back from Canada, he was held captive in Fort Randall. The government calls it protective custody, but he was really held captive there a couple of years. And then when they released him, he came back to Standing Rock. And he was troubled pretty much about how the American people were treating the Lakota people. So there's this first showman who came up, and his name was Albert Allen, and he wanted to include my great-grandfather in his show. So McLaughlin allowed him to go. And what they did was they toured the northern hemisphere of the U.S. along the Canadian border. And his show, he had a banner, he called it Symbol Connection. And my grandfather thought that he could go out there and he could share with the public the actual, who the Lakota people were, that we weren't savages or anything like this. But actually, he was just being used as a prop to get audiences in there to make money for the Albert Allen guy. But they went as far as possibly around where the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is. Then they traveled back down along the western edge of Lake Michigan and back into Minneapolis. And they were doing a presentation in Minneapolis, and that's where he encountered Annie Oakley, who came to Albert Allen's show and was trying to get on the show by showing her skills as a marksman with a weapon. And so they took my grandfather and his group to watch her. And he was really amazed at the young girl who could hit targets with their, different weapons. And he said she kind of reminded him of one of his daughters, Walks looking. So he went to meet with her, and he gifted her a pair of moccasins and told her that she was for a female who was so small and short, she was a great shot, and she was really a good person. And that she reminded him of his daughter, so he gifted her these moccasins. And that was the only time he ever had an encounter with Oakley. Then he came back to Standing Rock, and that's when Cody heard about what he did. So he took him, and my grandfather never spoke English, so he didn't know what they were saying about him or what they were doing. So when Cody took him, he had a banner too, and he always hung it out in front of his entrance. And the public would read it and said, "Come see Sitting Bull, the killer of Custer." So basically, eventually somebody who could read English and who was like an interpreter told him what they were doing. And he was disappointed in this. So the stories were never told what they did to him, but they started throwing rocks at him, spitting at him, calling him names. But he really didn't understand English, so he was kind of like disappointed. But one of the things, a positive note that came up from this idea was when they went to Philadelphia, they told him that they called the city of Philadelphia a city of brotherly love. And they wanted him to tour the city, so him and his group went out there and they took him down the streets of Philadelphia. And first thing they encountered was a bunch of little children, dirty and raggedy and hungry. and begging for food. And he was shocked. He said, wow, these people don't take care of the children, because in Lakota, we call our children Wakanja, which is short for Wichhóoyake kiη aglí, which is something sacred is growing. You never let it get cold, hungry, or dirty. You're always teaching them the positive facts of the Lakota people's life. So he went back, and he came back the next day, and they gave him money for his autograph. He used to sign his name in cursive. And then also, they took photographs of him. So they would give him a couple $2 for these. And, back in them days, he really didn't have any actual understanding of the value of what they were giving him, this money. So when he went out the next day, he took food, and he took this money, and he was handing it out to the children. And he gave them food, and he was like the ancient Pied Piper kind of a thing. These little kids came from everywhere that followed him around. But there's this Chinese artist, his name is Z.S. Liang. He's a painter. And he was asking me about, saying things about my grandfather. And I told him the story. He says, he had to look it up before he did anything. So he looked in, he went to the archives, the Philadelphia papers, the Philadelphia Inquirer had a little story of it in the corner. He said he read it, how he went out there and handed money and food to these little children. And so he painted a portrait of my grandfather. It wasn't really a picture, it was just an imagination thing. He was handing things to little children out there. But from then coming back, my grandfather knew that this encroachment of the Americans into our society, into our country, that eventually we're all going to end up like that. Have our children like be beggars on the streets and not be taken care of. So I guess his understanding of what's coming from the future for the Lakota people came true. But he only did one tour because he became very popular after that. The people started respecting him. They noticed that he wasn't a savage or what Cody portrayed him as, the killer and all this. So when he got back to Standing Rock, the Wampanoag would let him go again because of the popularity he had. So that was his only experience with Cody. And I've had people tell me that he's been overseas and everything. He never was. He only did one tour with this Albert Allen and with Cody. So from then on to now, that's the only thing. They never, my storytellers from my mother and them, they never told me about other incidents that he had because of how he was treated, on the way towards the East Coast. So I really don't have much of any, reaction or interaction with the people. But they said he became kind of popular coming back because he was looked at as a humanitarian kind of a person, for what he did at Philadelphia. So, but he, on the other hand, was disappointed and saddened because of how the Americans treated their children. So that's the only part. That's how much I know of the story. And then the photographs, there isn't much. I mean, we don't have any. I mean, most of them are in archives at Cody Museum in Wyoming. And Jeremiah Johnson, the Liberator guy, he told me, he has all these, he showed them to me when I was over there. So I don't really, it's public domain, so people can look at these photographs or whatever, the pictures of my grandfather anymore. But since from then on to now, my journey is, my mother told me all these stories. And at the beginning, when I was like 5, 6 years old, she told me these stories. And we lived on a reservation. I was born in Oglala, Pine Ridge. And she told me how we ended up in Pine Ridge, from Standing Rock. I mean, I kind of documented that story in my book, Sitting Bull's Life and Legacy, and in my documentary, Sitting Bull's Voice, how we ended up in Pine Ridge. Anyhow, while we were there, we didn't have, like I was telling people, I said, people have computers, electricity, and all this kind of stuff. Our little house had no electricity, no computers, nothing, just a kerosene lamp, my mother. And she was a storyteller. She would tell us stories about the Lakota culture and our ancestors. And she always emphasized one thing. She always said, never, ever take the name of your grandfather for yourself, because that was his name. She said, you have your own name, she says, and never be like him. She said, be like yourself. She says, take ideas from him, who he was. But she says, there's never going to be another person that's going to be like him, what he did for the people. And she said he was a sun dancer more than anything else. And she said, this is one of the cultural values of the Lakota people that is emphasized. And she says, don't take his name, or you don't do reenactments of him. She said, because they lived a sacred way of life back then. You do not reenact them. So I think a lot of the Lakota back in them days, they didn't really try to become actors to reenact our ancestors. So, I mean, they always have, like the Crazy Horse movie in the 50s with Victor Mature's Crazy Horse and stuff, But, these are things just little things that was told to me, so, I carried all these stories, she told me about how the Lakota people were, how the compassion, generosity, and the humility and the fortitude they had. And she always said, you always got to be humble. She says, always be humble, listen. And there's a time when you have to speak and tell things. And then she passed away when I was 10 years old. And so I had all these stories. I didn't know what to do with them until 1992. I had from on my Grego side, on my great-grandmother's side, come out and told me, it's time for you to come out of the shadows and tell the story, tell the world who you are, how you ended up in Pine Ridge, your family, and not in Standing Rock. So that was my journey started there, and people started doubting me. This is, that I'm, because I spent all this time I was in the Army, I was everywhere. Never told anybody once that ever related to Sitting Bull, because this is my humbleness to my ancestor, So in '92, when they told me this, I came out of the shadows, and I encountered my first public speaking was in Anadarko, Oklahoma, when they had a bust made of my grandfather. So they were going to unveil it and put it into the national, it was an a famous American Indians thing, a museum thing. And so I went down there, and from then on to now, people doubted me. Says, well, how do you know you're related? I said, through stories. I was told through stories. And then through basically what you call the paper trail, kind of like winter counts, the travel enrollments, the birth certificates. And I said through ceremonies. My grandfather came into ceremonies with other guys that were in sweat with, whatever, and he would tell them that he has Chakoja here, he's proud of that, he's starting to come back this way. And then the fourth way was a DNA. This is a modern thing. And we had a ceremony, and my grandfather came on and he chuckled. He said, he didn't understand what the DNA thing was, but, all this started because when he was murdered, the post surgeon up in Standing Rock, his name was Debo, Horace Debo, and he was a surgeon, but he was doubling as an undertaker. And when he brought my grandfather's remains up there after he was murdered, he cut off a lock of his hair. It's a little braid that comes off your scalp lock, it ties to your eagle feathers. He cut it off, probably about 8 inches long. And then he took the leggings off of his body for souvenirs for himself. In 1896, he presented these to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. And they had them ever since. In 1990, when the NHPRA was signed into law, they had to return all these things, the items that were stolen. And there was a lot of, I guess you might say the people who stole from grave sites. They took headdresses and stuff like that off the grave sites. And they presented them to the Smithsonian. Smithsonian has a whole couple of warehouses full of these kind of things. But anyhow, they were going to repatriate this hair and the leggings back to our family. And had a pair of moccasins that was given away when they were at Fort Randall. They couldn't return that because it was given away, it wasn't stolen or taken. And then that 1866 Winchester rifle that he surrendered at Fort Beaufort when he came back from Canada. They have that at the Smithsonian. And they couldn't return this because they're not religious or native items. So we did we got the hair back, and then I wanted to know what to do with the hair. So we did a ceremony here at my house, we invited a group of people. And this, while we were getting this repatriation, this DNA specialist from Denmark come, and he wanted to know if he could do a DNA off the hair. So I told him, I said, I can't give you permission. He said, why? That's because it's not my hair. I said, it belongs to my great grandfather. He goes, so he says, what do I do? I said, he's coming to the ceremony. So he came, and he's documented in my Sittingbull's voice documentary, what he went through, what he experienced. And he said, he told the world, he tells the world, he says, I'm a natural scientist. He says, I can prove anything in this world scientifically, except that ceremony. So, but he told him he could take a couple of inches of the hair and the rest has to be burned, he told me. The spirit told me so. That's where it took him years, because he had very little DNA in the hair because he didn't have the roots. It was cut off. But eventually, as technology and Europe came to flotation, they finally got the DNA out of it. And they got DNA from me and my sisters, and they compared it. And they have a new system they call some kind of a genome. He called it something like this. It comes from the male. He passes it on to his children, male and female, grandchildren and all that. This is the first time there was ever a connection between a person and to a great grandchild, so it was an interesting process, but eventually they came to they completed it in a couple of years ago in 2021, I think, when they did the write up the whole system, how they did it. So I said, well, everything, Lakota way of life, we always believe in fours, so I got my fourth way, my oral story, the paper trail, the spiritual way, and now the DNA. So this is where I'm at right now. And I've been invited to speak in many places, universities and schools, and all over Europe. So, there's more interest in Europe than it is in the US for Native people, and I think, if you ever watched Gunsmoke with, what's his name? Ed Little Sky, Eddie Little Sky. He'd always talks Lakota in there. And they say he said this, and he always says, So, I think he was, in his way, as a performer on the screen, he was telling those that understand Lakota that this land belongs to us, But anyhow, that's, been part of this organization you guys are doing here is, I don't have much to offer, but that's all I can offer, because my grandfather did one tour with Alvin Allen and one tour with Cody. And I had a granduncle who was a deaf mute who did time with Cody. He went to Europe and stuff, but he was Nukhtan. He was a deaf mute, so it's kind of hard to understand his stories. He always spoke to my mother through sign language, and she never told us what he said. So that part of his experiences with Cody are, gone, lost, I guess you might say, in terms of telling the story. But that's my contribution to your show here. And thanks for listening to me.
That was some good information, Ernie. We really thank you for coming on the radio with us today and talking about your grandfather, Sitting Bull. That's always interesting when we see things about our ancestors. And we're going to go on to our next guest, Donavin.
Good morning, everybody. Donavin Sprague. I'm real pleased to be a part of the project, and I want to thank Doug for the great overview of the program. And what we're doing, and to Amanda for the hosting, and Valerie and Ernie for his thoughts there. So yeah, really, number one and foremost is that we would like to talk to you, or willing to come and do interviews if you have any information on Buffalo Bill Wild West show, as far as your relatives who may have been in the show, or any kind of a connection to that. I'm in at Sheridan College, and just down the street here is where Cody lived, and it's now called the Sheridan Inn. It's a big house, and then so there's a lot of pictures out on the front porch of him with native people, and then of course just over the mountain here is the Buffalo Bill Historical Center at Cody, which was mentioned, full of resource material, and so we hope to tap into all of those as well. So last week I talked a little bit about the connection, also the connection between, say, like the ghost dance and Wounded Knee massacre, and how some of your relatives have been connected with that, and then went on the Wild West show. And specifically, I talked about those people some who survived the massacre, who were put in prison for, I guess, just being there or connected with it, and then talked about Cody coming, and they released those people to his custody, and they joined the Wild West show. So then what leads further from that is just like a ghost dance shirt or something, that like the one that was repatriated from Scotland to Cheyenne River. So that was the story there, as a lot of these items, they still had things like ghost dance shirts and things like that they often wore underneath their other garments. And so somehow those ended up over there. They were of interest to people in Europe, or I also gave an example of some of my family, even in the 1950s, who ended up in some kind of a show with Casey Tibbs and them in Japan, or over in that area, Japan or China, and how they came on to hard times and had to sell some of the valuable regalia of my grandfather. And I am from Hump. My Lakota name is Wichhóoyake. That's high backbone, which was translated later to Buffalo Hump, and then finally it was General Miles who started calling Chief Hump. So at least a little bit of just the historical part, and I'll throw that in because I just wanted to mainly emphasize, give our contact number out with Amanda and Valerie for you to contact us if you have information. So just for historical purposes, I'll give you a little historical background. It's connected with my grandfather and the ghost dance and Wounded Knee. So I was thinking about some of those people then that went to Illinois and who were put in prison. And I was thinking, well, none of our people from up north did that, because, and it was kind of a sad thought. I thought, well, they killed them all. They all died, or they went back, and those went back to the areas of like Takini and Cherry Creek, Red Scapple, and they come out alive. Takini comes out alive. So the few there, the stories that we had about the Wild West show, and that was that they did not want to anything to do do with that. And so I don't know if anybody up north anybody up north, I'm talking about Fine River and Standing especially the Minnekoju and Woksape and quite a few Etosa show as well involved in that. But there were other shows going on, similar things. So this kind of caught on, like even with Lewis and Clark, in 1804 at Fort Pierre and that, and George Catlin comes in. And I mean, they're putting on these shows, and these travelers and explorers are loving them. They're being treated as royalty and guests. And, there were some other, problems as far as kind of like, which led almost like to warfare in that, in the case of like our relative Black Buffalo, which had to take one of the boats. But when I was I'm also an Oklahoma author as well, but I've been down to the Pawnee Bill had a Wild West show down there. So there, like was mentioned, there were other shows that were going on. And so some of our people of the Owoju, they engaged in some other things around the state. And so like my great grandfather Hump was also with Sitting Bull in Canada and surrendered from up there. One of the last of the many people that came back from Canada. And I don't know if Ernie remembers, but I was also at his place with the DNA thing, with the Smithsonian and the people from Denmark, and looked at artifacts and also verified Ernie's relationship as far as records I had in genealogy and history, to his grandfather. So anyway, when my grandfather come back, like to Cherry Creek, must about doubled the reservation size, because he had by far the largest number of people still in his band. He had 714 who surrendered, and those names are every man, woman, and child. And Sitting Bull surrender census by Ephraim Dixon, which is a great genealogy tool also of names, because a lot of those names changed later. So then he also Pump became a ghost dancer with Sitting Bull and Kicking Bear and all them, and had contact with Wovoka. Actual letters were written back and forth. And so the difference between probably like McLaughlin was agent at Standing Rock was that he's going to stop a lot of that stuff. He's going to stop the ghost dance up there. And the reports and documents from our agent at Fort Benedict at Cheyenne River was just kind of, leave them alone, not committing any depredations or harming any people. So my grandfather, he wrote up that they feared him. They said there would be a big war, and they said just leave him alone. He's not hurting anybody. So he went outside the reservation, which was against the policy, because it was like a concentration camp. You couldn't leave, and you had to get permission. But he never asked for any permission. So here he is ghost dancing down in the stronghold in the Badlands, along with his cousin Spotted Elk, who became known as Bigfoot, and clear up into the Slim Buttes area, not the Pine Ridge Slim Buttes, but up in the north country of Buffalo, South Dakota area, Harding County, up in there. And he's taken his band all over, he's hunting and doing all the things he shouldn't be doing, I guess, in the eyes of the agent. So then later he got permission then to, and this was like through his friendship with the archivists were coming out from Pierre, like Don Robinson and those people, Stephen Riggs befriended all of them, and they were coming out to like Cherry Creek and those areas and interviewing. And then they got the idea, well, let's do some kind of a show here, and they put my grandfather on a lecture circuit, kind of as a best way I could explain it. And so they went around and they were doing this Wild West show type thing too. That's what was popular and was wanted. So some of the places they went, like I've got pictures of him, rare pictures over at Pier. And some of the numbers were incredible, right downtown, standing on a buggy. And all these people, I mean, there's like thousands of people came out for this, and out where the Pier Indian Learning Center, a large camp with, thousands of people, and it was a big, it was like tourism thing too, is what was going on. But this whole pageant thing is going on. There's writers and performers, and not only dance, but like reenactments. Same thing for Rapid City. I have pictures of my grandfather at Rapid City, and they're performing over by, for some of you that might know the Robbinsdale area in Rapid City. And that was way out in the country. And they're over around 5th Street with teepees and all this going on. And again, reenactment and a big celebration. The Rapid City Indian School was relatively new. And a lot of these people were coming out now to the Black Hills. It's like, hey, wow, now we can officially be back and see our kids at the Rapid City Indian School and be able to come back to our sacred Black Hills, which was, we were like exiled like before that. Now there was a reason to be there, and these celebrations started. And not to mention Hollywood, picks up on all this too. And does a lot of things. And if you ever look at like Ulrich is just down the road from some of you at Pine Ridge there. So my grandfather Hump was also on a lecture deal over there at this same time period. And my time period, he died in 1908. So you have World War I is also coming in there, but. He spoke at the grand opening of the town at Ulrich, and who else was there? I was thinking, like, mentioned Annie Oakley, but he met Calamity Jane, of all people. So she is one of the speakers as well, and so this is all documented in the founding of the town of Ulrich. And so again, there's thousands of Lakota and Cheyenne, and they're doing reenactment, and they're just amazed at the horsemanship and performances and showing off with their writing skills. And my grandfather spoke, and then Calamity Jane was not around. It's down there where the Main Street is today of Ulrich. And so they went looking for her. They knew she was around there somewhere. And here they found her down at the saloon. And it was early in the morning, say like about 10 o'clock or so, and she had already been down there and stopped the padlock off the door, and she laid inside, passed out. So anyway, she missed her speaking engagement, but that's just some history. And I'm also encouraging you all to think about the interest of history of your families, and record that. And think about pictures and things that happen, because I'm kind of the caretaker for the Hump family of our family, and that's why I was given the name, because I keep the records of the family, and I'm also a resource for our tribe as well, for people who are looking for Lakota history of some of the Lakota. So anyway, that's just I wanted to add those things because it was all connected to the Wild West show, time period. There's a popularity for this, and then finally, just that as I briefly mentioned, Hollywood really picks up on this, and of course they are real heavy with the the stereotypes, and while there were stereotypes that came out of these Wild West shows, including Buffalo Bills, you know, it certainly beat sitting in jail in Illinois when you could be out and somewhat reliving a part of the old ways. So thank you for letting me share that, and I'll turn it over to Amanda. I think we're kind of winding down, and maybe she can give you those numbers again. Contact. Do you have me on?
Thank you, Donavin. That was some good information. We are winding down our show, and that went pretty quick. I had a little panic attack there for a while when nobody was hopping on, but we did a pretty good job of it. And I want to thank Douglas. I want to thank Ernie and Donavin for the good information. Again, just remind you that this is the show we do every Thursday, and I think we have like 3 shows left to do on Thursday mornings. And what we're doing is just bringing forth information about our Lakota ancestors that performed with the Buffalo Bill Cody Wild West show. I think there was just over a little over 1,000 shows he did across the United States and overseas, and a lot of our ancestors were a part of that. They traveled with the show. One of the great things that I see that was a part of it was the imagery that was saved through history, and that's what we see today of our ancestors. And a lot of that, like Douglas was talking about, some of them are not identified. It was really great for all these photographers to come forth, and they wanted to, photograph our ancestors that were in the show, and records weren't really kept good, and that's a part of some of our family history too. We have families that have historical photos, and they didn't identify them. And so this show is just to bring forth that information, that this is a project of Oglala Lakota College, and we really want to work on writing this part of history for our ancestors, with the photographs, the collections, and their stories. Next time, I think next week, we're going to be talking more about resources. What kind of resources are available beside the Cody archives that you could go look for. And so there's just a lot of conversation pieces around the Cody archives, not only the photographs, but when you study photo forensics, our ancestors, what their dresses were, what their regalia was about. And stories like what Donavin was talking about. And I talked last week about my elder cousin who talked about our great-grandfather, her grandfather, that was a part of the show. I'm not sure how many seasons he did, but he did have photographs that were taken. And my mother's grandfather was also a part of the show, and he told her stories about it, and she wrote it down in her journal. And I remember her telling those stories about him, that he went and the things he came back with, the stories and the teachings he told them. So when I really thought about it, well, her grandfather taught her things about, the outside world, being in mainstream, how to live in mainstream. And so, those teachings were passed on through generations. So we all carry some of them teachings from our ancestors. And that's really an important part of that connection, not only from what we're talking about with the show, but just our ancestors in general. And so, that's where my interest lies in genealogy. I also do a column for Lakota Times. When I have time, I write on Sundays and talk about genealogy, encouraging people to look back in their history and to build family trees, to make connections to their ancestors, because that's a part of who we are, as a person. If you go back 7 generations, you're a part of 64 people that made you up. Your beliefs, how you look, your health, and that's a part of you. And so that identifies who you are. And that's what a lot of our youth struggle with, is their identity and the strengths that we got from our ancestors. So I just want to talk about that, and we're going to give you one phone number, and that's at the OLC Archives, 605-455-6065. You can contact them if you have stories, if collections, if you have questions about the project. You can always contact me on my social media. Then Cecilia, she has her social media, and if you want to get a hold of Doug or Donavin, I'm pretty sure Donovan's pretty easy to get a hold of. But so to get a hold of us, if you have questions, or you want to tell stories, or you have something in your family history that you want to share about that. I know we went a little bit over our time here. So this was really a great show, and we're going to come back on next Thursday at 9 a.m. with some more resources, some more guests that are going to be talking about their stories, and maybe we'll tell some stories of the stories we've heard, because it's always exciting to tell those stories in a way, because we learn from stories. And so that kind of about wraps up our show. If anybody else has anything they want to add, Doug, Donavin, Ernie.
Thank you, Amanda. We appreciated the opportunity.
I did ask Doug if the Rough Riders, but we didn't really get totally to that subject yet. But that's a part of what the show was about, and I've always had a great interest in that, because we had my children's great grandfather was a Rough Rider. So I was like, what did he do in that show? You know, what was his role? What was his what was it all about? You know, the him being in with the show. Anybody else have anything they want to add? And I really thank Ernie for coming on, telling his story, his great grandfather, Sitting Bull.
Thanks for having me on.
I have a granddaughter, one of my sister's granddaughters. She's related to Sitting Bull too. She comes from that lineage from her paternal side. And I was flipping through all the photographs of him one time, and I saw a daughter that looked like her. Or my granddaughter looks like her. The facial, I always wondered where she got that from. And that was kind of interesting. So, you know, another part of my interest is DNA, looking at DNA and how we make connections with those, and how I see, like, even in my own family, that sometimes DNA skips a generation or so. You could see somebody, one of my cousins, how she looks like her great grandmother, you know, just almost exactly like her. And then I have a niece who looks like my great grandmother. And I always wondered where my niece got her looks from, you know, her facial features. And, it really didn't come from her mother's side. And I was trying to figure that out. And then I saw a picture of my great grandmother. That's where she got it from, you know. So the DNA buildup of that's really an interesting subject too. But I want to thank everybody for listening to us, and we will be talking again next Thursday at 9 a.m. Thank you.